Story 1. This happened many years ago when I was a field organizer, and I ended up with a manager who had explicitly said she didn't want to manage anybody. However, a series of events led to me becoming her direct report. In our initial meeting, I went over everything I'd been doing up to that point: where to find my weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual reports, how to keep track of where I'd be, and how to give me feedback between our monthly check-ins. She was not used to working with field organizers and was shocked that I wasn't going to be in the office except for meetings and to turn in my reports. It's fine to not know things, but then she went and said, "If you're not in the office where I can see you, how will I know you're working? You could be doing anything you want, and I'd never know." Aside from the assumptions that makes about my character, whether or not someone looks like they're working is a terrible metric for measuring what work is actually getting done. But I kept that to myself. Rather innocently, I offered to have my task tracking application send her an email whenever I accomplished a task. She agreed. The thing about me is that I am a fast worker. I always have been. It's been a bone of contention with people I work with. I create backlogs. I make other people feel weird about how much they do in a day. I used to get upset about this and wish everybody was as fast as me. By this time in my career, though, I had learned to keep it to myself and spend some portion of my day pacing myself with others, or to find jobs where my pace wasn't that strange. This job was the latter. We were doing underfunded community-driven work where the failure or success of a project sometimes meant that the people we served couldn't pay their rent or afford food. So I was blazingly fast. After 3 days of hundreds of emails a day notifying her the second I completed a task, my boss decided that she actually didn't need to know whether I was working or not. We actually became good friends after that because we realized we had a lot in common and teamed up against the other bosses who kept making poor decisions and putting us in bad places because they knew we were both competent enough to solve their problems for them. Neither of us work there anymore. We've moved on to much better things, but we're still friends. Story 2. Update: Joe got beat up in the bathroom. I went earlier and found blood spots scattered all around. Joe told the police that he fell down the stairs, but the guy ended up needing urgent surgery, dealing with collapsed lungs, and something happened to his kidneys. He said he fell Sunday night around 3 a.m. The police asked me many times if I heard or saw anything, but I didn't. Then, I remembered a red car parked near my house on Monday, just before Joe called the police. My dogs went crazy, so I got up and saw a red car. While it wasn't in my driveway, the only place it could go was my house. My boyfriend saw the car once or twice, waiting a bit before leaving. I guess the driver was Joe's dealer. What I think happened is the dealer came Sunday night for a debt. Joe didn't have the money, so he got beaten up and was given a day to gather it, which is why the dealer came back the next day. That would explain why Joe's mother told me that Joe would not come back since it would protect him and me. I didn't think much about it, but it kind of makes sense now. She surely is the one who paid the red car guy. Joe texted me today. After reading my many texts about the other money, he owes me $60 for a sofa he got from his job that was never delivered, and $50 more for electricity since I told him I would charge him more every time he left the air conditioning on with all the windows open, and replacement for 2 beautiful bedside lamps that came with the apartment, to just say what injuries he had. He didn't answer anything specific, just said he was in the hospital with collapsed lungs and a concussion. I asked him who the red car belonged to, and he denied anyone coming, saying his debt was fully paid to his ex-drug dealer, who doesn't drive a red car. He claimed the blood was from a pimple. So, he got beaten in my house by a drug dealer. His mom knew. They wanted him to stay here for the same price. He overdosed the next day, and they are all playing victim with me. I told him I want everything clean and paid for before September, or I would take him to court, showing him the same respect he shows me. For context, I, a 32-year-old female, bought a big house last October that has 2 rooms connected by a corridor on top of my garage. It has a private entrance. I rented it out, with internet, water, parking, pet-friendly access to the backyard, and I did the laundry for this specific tenant. Let's call him Joe. So, Joe is a 25-year-old male and is a drug addict. Not too bad, but I noticed it. The lease was monthly because I wanted the option to kick him out after a month if he acted up. Also, I let him keep a lot of things in the garage for free. So, today he overdosed. The police came, and I had to let them in. He was so messed up that they thought somebody came during the night to beat him up. He was speaking nonsense and complaining about being hurt on the arm and right side. The ambulance came, and they took him to the hospital. I couldn't go upstairs for a while because it became a crime scene. Let me tell you, the place is trashed. There are empty bottles everywhere, full ashtrays, rotten food, a flood from my air conditioning unit, and the litter was utterly disgusting. Also, I took his cat, and the first thing she did was eat all the food in the bowl. She is so thin. Since January, he paid his rent late $800 without telling me. I always had to contact him, and he would get back to me a few days later with an excuse. To make it easier for him, he could pay it in 2 installments. Then comes the entitled mother. I reached out to her earlier to tell her what happened. I know the police didn't, and explained that I needed the rent by Friday, or he was out. At this point, I was done with him. I would move his things to the garage until he could pick them up so I could fix the apartment and put someone else in. She told me she would pay since he already asked her because he didn't have money. Later, I came with an offer. I would charge $200 more per month because I would not keep him if I didn't have more money for repairs and whatnot, and she would need to be his guarantor. I was feeling kind of sorry for him. She answered that I was letting her son down, that he was in a bad spot, and that I was just greedy and mean for not giving him another chance. She told me that he had overdosed and had drug-induced psychosis before, and she was trying to get him better. She was the only one cleaning the apartment up, not him, and lent him cash for the rent too, without me knowing. I told her that the police did a neighborhood survey, for goodness sake, and that I was ashamed of it. She put it in my face that I was only caring about my reputation. But she doesn't want to take care of him. I am supposed to. My apartment is not good enough for him. It's just basic for the price. Also, I am in an upscale neighborhood near downtown. I am below market price. She berated me and even included some emojis, such as the winky one. I even told her that I would do the cleanup so that her son could come back from the hospital to a clean place. He needed emergency surgery. After her long text, I told her she could do it herself. She lives an hour and a half away. I cannot believe it. This is my first time renting, and I wanted to be a good landlord. I don't have a lot of money, and I wanted to charge a fair amount just to help me out with the mortgage. Seeing what he did to my place honestly shocked me, and the smell was horrible. I wasn't expecting this response from her. How could she honestly think I would put up with this without caution and any charge for repairs and insurance since he is clearly smoking inside? Story 3. One of my upper-level finance classes in college had a big community service component where we would act as financial advisors for underprivileged adults for free. Organization and outreach was always a big problem, so the class was actually split into a real class component and an extracurricular club component. Basically, you could either join the class, get credit, but do a lot more research/paperwork/effort, or join the club, have a resume builder, but just do volunteer activist administration. This way, more people could help out with varying levels of effort. I had originally joined the club as it was my freshman year, and I didn't have the prerequisites to join the class, but I was very dedicated, so my professor made an exception for me. At the beginning of the semester, we were assigned a group and a local family to work with for the duration of the class. Essentially, we had to interview the family several times and work with them to produce a 20-page comprehensive business plan for them that would count as our final exam grade. My group consisted of Grace, a junior who was only part of the club and just helping us out if she had time, and Kelsey, a senior who is the main antagonist of this story. Kelsey was extremely entitled and clearly had a severe case of senioritis. The class met twice a week, but she showed up to it so few times that when I mentioned she was my group mate near the end of the semester, no one even knew who she was. She told everyone that she was sick all the time, but somehow that didn't go away the entire semester. It wasn't just the class either. She only showed up to one interview with the family and ran the whole interview like she was the expert on their case. When she was with me, she would talk about all the things she was planning on doing for the group, but she would never actually do anything. Halfway through the semester, when we showed our family the beginnings of our paper, she presented our plan to the family like she had come up with it. Even though I wrote 8 pages, Grace had helped with just under a page, and Kelsey wrote one short introductory paragraph. I really could have dealt with Kelsey's antics if she had been your typical senior slacker that avoided the spotlight. But taking my work and naming it as her own really got me mad. She very clearly thought that I was some shy freshman that would never stand up to a big cool senior like her. Fortunately, I had suggested that we write our paper on a Google Doc, a way that we could all edit the same paper online without having to meet up or email it back and forth. Google Docs also track the individual edits that every person makes to the paper. This was a capability that Kelsey was not aware of. For the rest of the semester, I played it cool with Kelsey. I went along when she said she would do her work and acted as your average group member that trusted that she would do her share. Grace helped check over what I had written, but ultimately had to focus on her actual exams and left the project to me and Kelsey. The weekend of the due date, Kelsey had still not touched the paper since she wrote her one paragraph, so I texted her a few times asking if she was planning on working on it. No response. I wrote several more pages and waited until the night before the paper was due. I texted her one last time. Still no response. At this point, if she had worked from when I texted her to when the paper was due, she could still not match the time I had put in, and she had no interview notes to even write about. I sent an email to my professor explaining that Kelsey had deserted me. I could prove very clearly she had written only one paragraph, and I would need an extension if I was going to finish the paper. A few hours later, I received an email from my professor saying she would take care of it and to come into her office the next day. The following morning due day, while I was in another class, I started getting texts from Kelsey. Then calls. More texts. I walked back home from class slowly so she would marinate in stress. Then I called her back. She started out saying there must have been a mistake because it seems our professor thought she had only written one paragraph of our paper. I told her that yes, I had explained that I needed more time to do all the work she was supposed to have done. She claimed that I was being ridiculous, and she had definitely written way more than one paragraph. I calmly explained that I was looking at the Google Doc edit history, and she had definitely written one paragraph. She grew audibly more hysterical and started accusing me of tattling on her like a child, and I told her that there would be nothing to tattle on if she had done the work. Then she started screaming about how I was targeting her, and I should be mad at Grace too. That's right, she showed up so few times she was not aware that Grace was only a volunteer club member and didn't have to write the paper. She really thought I wouldn't be able to tell her writing from Grace's, and she could pretend she had written more. Finally, she went off the rails, shouting something about how she had actually written 5 pages on another document that she was unable to actually produce, and that she didn't even need this course anyway, among other crazy accusations. I told her that I had said all I needed to say, she wasn't going to touch my paper, and that if she didn't need the grade she should be okay with failing, and hung up on her. I went to my professor's office and clearly proved the paper belonged to me with Grace's assistance. I could see Kelsey editing the document trying to steal what I had written, but that was stopped by a strongly worded email from my professor. I got a bit of extra time and ultimately received Kelsey never showed up to class again. Story 4. Man, you won't believe the crazy situation I got into when I was visiting my sister's place. So, here's the deal, my sister lives in this kinda sketchy neighborhood, and I had to park my minivan out on the street. I totally forgot to lock it, and that turned out to be a big mistake. I had a pretty normal day at my sister's, catching up, having a good time, and all that jazz. But when it was time to head home, I walked back to my minivan, and my heart just about jumped out of my chest. There's this lady sitting in the driver's seat, and she looked like the living embodiment of the infamous Karen. I'm like, "What the heck are you doing in my car?" She kinda looks at me all surprised, but not really sorry, and says, "Oh, I saw the car was open, and I just needed a place to change and chill for a bit." I'm standing there with my jaw on the ground, like, "Are you serious? This is my car, lady." She's looking all calm, unfazed, and says, "Yeah, well, you should lock your car, you know." Now, I'm not one to usually lose my cool, but this lady had just invaded my personal space like it was no big deal. I'm still trying to process this, but then I catch a whiff of something sweet, and I remember I had a brand new bottle of fancy perfume in my glove box. I knew it was there when I parked the van. But guess what? I open the glove box, and the perfume is nowhere in sight. I'm like, "Lady, you've got some explaining to do. Where's my perfume?" She tries to act all innocent, but her nervousness is starting to show. "Perfume? I have no idea what you're talking about." I'm not buying it. I tell her, "You've been in here for who knows how long, and my perfume magically disappears. You've got some explaining to do." So, I decide it's time to get the law involved. I pull out my phone, dial 911, and within what feels like record time, the cops show up. I'm explaining the whole crazy situation to them, and they're giving me those, "Seriously, a Karen?" looks. But they go over to her, and after some back and forth, they pull her out of my van, slap on the cuffs, and start reading her rights. It was wild. She's screaming, "This is ridiculous. I didn't steal anything. You people are crazy." The cops are like, "Ma'am, you're under arrest for breaking and entering." And that's how this whole fiasco went down. I never thought I'd have to call the cops on someone for trying to steal my perfume. But here we are. Turns out, this Karen had quite the rap sheet. She'd been in trouble with the law for all sorts of petty crimes before. I guess this was just another one to add to her list. The whole thing left me feeling both relieved and kinda baffled. Who breaks into a car just to use it as a personal changing room and chill spot? Karen, apparently. I get it. Sometimes you need a place to change, but there are public restrooms for that kind of thing. And what's even crazier is that she didn't just steal some cash or electronics. She stole my perfume. I talked to the cops a bit more after all the commotion settled down, and they told me that sometimes people like Karen do strange things like this. They're not necessarily after anything valuable, they just get a thrill out of invading someone's personal space. I guess I should be glad she didn't do anything more serious, but it's still a bizarre experience to go through. The whole situation made me rethink some things, though. Locking your car should be a no-brainer in a neighborhood like my sister's, but sometimes we get complacent. It's easy to think, "Oh, it won't happen to me," until it does. So, lesson learned: always lock your car, even if you're just running into a family member's place for a little while. Now, as for Karen, I never found out why she was so fixated on my perfume. Maybe she just really liked that scent. But hey, it's a valuable lesson: don't mess with someone's personal space, especially when it smells so good. And remember, you might meet the most unexpected Karens in the most unexpected places. Story 5. Hi everyone. I'm posting to seek advice because I feel at my wit's end and am in the process of securing a therapist, but haven't yet. To give a brief backstory, my mother and father divorced when I was 1.5 years old, and my father married my stepmother when I was 5. I've known her since I was 3 years old, and she's always been a part of my life, so I've considered her a third parent. The parents in reference to the title are my dad and stepmom. My mom has been very supportive throughout this and has truly been my rock. They are all in their late 50s to early 60s in age, and we are all Latino, so please take into account cultural and generational differences here. 2.5 years ago, in late 2021, I started dating my girlfriend, who is white and non-Latina. My girlfriend and I have had a great relationship. Our communication in conflicts was solid. I got along great with her friend group, and she really made me feel seen regarding my gender identity. The biggest problem with my girlfriend has always been how shy she is. The 2 times we got dinner with my mom, she barely spoke, and my mom doesn't have anything against her because she hasn't been able to get to know her words. Things came to a head in March of last year, after I told my parents we wanted to move in with each other a few months prior. My dad and stepmom blew up at me, stating that I was trying to lie to them or deceive them about the point our relationship was at, because only people who were very serious about getting married move in with each other. My mom, dad, and stepmom decided to meet her in March, and it went horribly. I was so anxious beforehand that I didn't sit her down and brief her about how my parents are, and that they already didn't like her. By the way, only my mom has consistently used the correct gender pronouns for her. She's not super feminine, so my dad and stepmom insist on misgendering her and calling her my boyfriend instead. They have yelled at me when I correct them, so I eventually stopped to avoid instigating fights. They basically interrogated her about what her intentions were, what her plans for the future were, etc. My girlfriend dropped out of university and started working as an emergency medical technician and plans to become a paramedic. They insisted that that was beneath me and that I needed someone with a socioeconomic background and education similar to mine. Meanwhile, she was raised by parents wealthy enough that they can afford to live in one of the most expensive parts of the state. At the time, I had been accepted into a Doctor of Philosophy program, and the discrepancy in education was a major sticking point for them, despite the fact that my dad didn't get his associate degree until 2019, with my help in tutoring him, while my stepmom and mom both have degrees. I told my girlfriend that it had gone poorly and that we needed to do something to make up for it. But quite frankly, neither one of us could think of what to do. Then graduation came in May. I snuck away from my parents to see her and then took her over to see them. Everyone was visibly uncomfortable, and the interaction ended quickly as I had other family there that I wasn't out to yet and did not know who my girlfriend was. Since then, I have moved out of state into an apartment that is too expensive for my stipend and have relied on financial help from both sets of parents. Thankfully, I'll be getting a raise and will be able to afford life on my own come this fall, albeit on a very tight budget. However, every time I have visited my dad and stepmom, a 6+ hour long fight always happens where they berate me for still being with my girlfriend, insist that she is not the one for me, and accuse me of lying to them. They get upset at me when I start crying and shut down mid-argument. This past month, it was 2 days of these fights, 6 hours the first day and 7 hours the second, where it climaxed in them threatening to not give me a cent of the inheritance if I stayed with her. They have also said other concerning financially related things, such as when I told them I didn't want their help anymore come this fall, they said, "You don't think we won't have a say in your life if we're not giving you money, right?" I called her that night, sobbing, as she had noticed my distance over the past couple of days and my lack of responding to her texts. She had also just put down a deposit for an apartment in my area. I cried and told her that this wasn't sustainable, that I couldn't continue like this, and that I couldn't handle the constant emotional battery from my parents. I apologized profusely and told her I didn't know what else to do. The most obvious answer now is to have told them to back off and book a flight the next day. But I know that would have started a massive argument, and I'd rather confront them over the phone in the safety of my apartment many states away. I know that in the long term, I probably wouldn't have been able to stay with her. My extended family is so homophobic and transphobic that I know I will have a hard time bringing a cisgender woman home, much less a transgender woman. It just breaks my heart, knowing that I gave in when I had been resisting this for almost a year and a half now. I guess what I'm asking for here is if anyone else can relate. Has anyone else been in a similar situation? What should I do? How do I go about this situation? I really appreciate any help. Story 6. I'm an 18-year-old female, and I had to get a blood draw this morning because I had several orders from my doctors. It involved drawing a lot of blood, about 10 vials. While I've had blood draws before, I had never experienced one with this much blood. Note, I have a history of feeling lightheaded after vaccinations and blood draws, and I only fully passed out during my first blood draw. I'm not afraid of needles, it's just my body's reaction. Anyway, back to the story. My mom and I arrived at the clinic and waited. When I was called in, I immediately told the technician that I needed to lie down because I was familiar with how my body responds. She acknowledged my request and took me to a room with a reclining chair. Once we were in the room, she started entering information into the computer, which took significantly longer than usual. As she worked, I began feeling lightheaded while standing, so I sat in the chair because I couldn't remain standing without feeling dizzy. I then told my mom that I felt faint, and she advised me to drink some water. I had eaten a full breakfast and drank plenty of water before the visit. After about 15 minutes, the technician finished her computer work, and my mom asked if she could recline the chair further. The technician looked at me with an expression that suggested she thought I was being overly dramatic, but adjusted the chair anyway. I began deep breathing to avoid panicking, knowing it was essential. Despite this, I felt increasingly lightheaded, and it seemed like the process was never ending. I felt as though she kept switching from one tube to another, hoping that each one would be the last. Once the blood draw was completed, that's when things took a turn for the worse. My blood pressure dropped, and blood began pooling in my lower limbs. It got so severe that I couldn't even move my fingers due to the muscle tension. I experienced tunnel vision and appeared very pale. I started going in and out of consciousness, and the technician brought me a cold pack. When I didn't regain consciousness after 7 minutes, she called for additional assistance. 2 more staff members arrived, who were much kinder than the first technician. They reassured my mom and gave me more cold packs. I vaguely remember mumbling, "Help," because I felt so awful. It was the worst I've ever felt. The main technician quickly changed her attitude and appeared concerned. The other 2 staff members called the emergency room to get assistance, but they said they couldn't help, even though I was already in a hospital. Eventually, I came around after 15 minutes, but it was a brutal experience. I hope that technician now understands the importance of allowing patients to lie down if they request it. If you have experienced similar feelings after blood draws or vaccinations, please leave a comment, as I don't know anyone else who shares this experience. Story 7. I F22 am the only child of my parents M53, F50. My dad passed away 3 to 4 years ago. He was the parent I was closest to. I did everything with him, and we shared the same interests. He also punished me a lot in the name of discipline, using a belt. It could be for the smallest thing, from misbehavior to academic performance. Despite this, I still loved and love him. Where I'm from, I'm not a United States resident. It's pretty normal to discipline your child that way. Growing up, I lived a comfortable life, and my dad did almost everything for me. My mom, on the other hand, was almost never around as she was always pursuing higher education. We weren't close and never saw eye to eye. We spent family time together, but I didn't have the same bond with her as I had with my father. She would often bitterly complain to my father that he was spoiling me, leading to a few arguments even though they rarely fought otherwise. Deep down, I always knew my mother and I could never get along. Fast forward 3 to 4 years ago. My dad passed away from a liver disease brought on by either his hypertension or diabetes. I still mourn him and feel very empty without him. He was my best friend, though he took the wrong route in correcting me as a kid. I once made a comment about how my mother and I would never be able to coexist as we were vastly different people. Shortly after, he passed away and willed everything he owned to me. He jointly shared everything with her, so I inherited his part. After the will was read, we were supposed to file for probate, pay whatever taxes needed, and transfer everything to my name. We received the insurance money shortly after he passed, and my mom promised to file for probate. However, she didn't. She also lied to many family members, claiming I spent my part of the insurance money when she took it and left me with a small sum, which I used for educational purposes. We fought nonstop after he died because I hate lies against my name. To show you the type of person I'm living with, I once told her I wanted to start going to the gym to lose weight. She got angry and called me an expensive girl. I kept quiet and let her rant because that's how everyone else deals with her. She won't listen and creates her own narrative in which she's always the victim. My lack of retaliation seemed to make her want a reaction from me, so much so that she said, "I'll die, okay? I'll also die. You want me to die so I can stop nagging you. Dear reader, this was less than 3 months after my father passed away. You can imagine my shock when she said that. This is just one instance of the many times I've had to suffer because she's like a fuse waiting to blow up. Either December last year or January this year, I asked her why we hadn't filed for probate yet because I didn't feel comfortable signing under my father's name when we sold properties since he's passed. She threw a tantrum, claiming I was trying to take properties from her, and began to dictate what I could and couldn't take from her. I was in shock. She even called my cousin, saying my father didn't leave the will in my name, but rather just said he leaves it to his daughter. She claimed that even if I put in a claim, it could be refuted since it wasn't explicitly my name on it. My full legal name is on that will, and no one can claim anything from it except me. I was so shocked because how could a biological mother think this way about her child? She also said other appalling things that I won't include here as it would make this already long post even longer. She even said very disgusting things about my late father. A few weeks later, we found out there was some money we could claim from my dad's old job. When they insisted we needed the probate to proceed, her attitude completely changed. She made it seem like she had always wanted the probate all along and promised to file for it when we got the money. When I asked again, they reiterated that we couldn't get the money without the probate. That's when she realized she had to get the probate to access that money. So, we started the process. For context, I tried to take my own life last year, but my friends saved me just in time. Since then, our bickering has reduced because she realized she'd lose her child and people would ask her what she did. Yesterday, she said we had to meet today to mail a letter to a family member. I told her I had no money for transportation and had a paper tomorrow, so we should have gone for it last week. She flew into a rage, calling me self-centered and all sorts of names. I didn't listen to the rest of her rage-induced voice note. I hate being called certain names and mentioned certain things, which delved into another type of conversation that led to me reminding her of how I'd always be punished if I didn't pass my exams. This made me anxious about examinations, and I've never shown her my results since junior high school to avoid punishment or scolding. She completely turned the entire conversation around, saying I claimed she and my father were horrible and wicked parents, and that their act of giving birth to me should be enough for me to forgive all the wrongs done to me. These are people who punished me and left marks on my body, so I had to tell my friends they did it to show I was a bad child, hoping my friends would no longer want to be friends with me. The conversation just annoyed me as it felt like I was speaking to a 5-year-old. She said I disrespected her by saying what I said and continued to rant. The only thing that would calm her down was an apology, which I gave her as I wanted it to end. I thought that was the end. Reader, tell me why I woke up to several messages and voice notes trying to gaslight and guilt-trip me. She claimed I said things I never said, and you only need to scroll up in our chat to see she's lying. When I pointed it out, she said I was disrespecting her by accusing her of putting words in my mouth. I told her it was enough, and she should stop attaching meanings to my words. She said I implied they were horrible parents because they punished me. However, I clarified earlier that someone can be good to you and still hurt you, and that their goodness doesn't negate the harm they caused. They were good parents, but they still hurt me. I am thoroughly exhausted by this environment and living with someone who can only be the victim and never the villain. Oh, I forgot to mention that when I said she should stop attaching meanings to my words, she accused me of ordering her around. I just want us to finish filing this probate so I can finally speak my mind. My friends are equally tired on my behalf and wonder why I haven't cut her off yet. But I still need to live under her roof as I have nowhere else to go. No one can live with her, but they expect me to because she's my mother.